Well, thanks for jumping on here, and I look forward to discussing what the that interaction that you are dedicating what seems to be most of your life to the metabolic conditions as it relates to brain energy and brain metabolism and function. And congratulations on your new book,
Thank you.
Brain Energy, a revolutionary breakthrough in understanding mental health and improving treatment for anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, and the list continues. But it's super important, right? And just in kind of looking at what you're doing, of course it's all connected, right? Of course, we it's easy to put silos into things because that's how our little brains seem to work. What were like I'd love to hear a little bit about your path, and then what kind of led you to this, your own epiphany around these things, mental health, brain condition are essentially linked.
I am a conservative, tried and true psychiatrist. I am at the bastion of conservative mental health. I'm at Harvard Medical School. I've been here for 27 years. I'm the director of continuing education here. I've done neuroscience research. And by and large, I have worked with patients with treatment resistant mental illness. And that means severe, chronic, debilitating mental disorders. I do not get bread and butter depression, anxiety off the street, and somebody who's just feeling a little down. I do not treat the worried well. I treat severely incapacitated people with things like severe depression, OCD, anxiety, substance use disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. and um, and I will just say that I came into this field desperately wanting to help these people, and sometimes I do. Sometimes our treatments work. Sometimes the pills I prescribe work and they work well. Sometimes the psychotherapy I do works and works well. Sometimes even ECT works well, shock therapy. But far too often, our current treatments don't work. And I have been frustrated with the lack of improvement in the patients that I see. And early in my career, I kind of started wondering, like, is it just me? Am I just a bad psychiatrist? Like, why am I not getting everyone better? What's going on here? The more research I did, the more I learned, the more clinicians I talked to, the more researchers I talked to, I recognized this is the state of the mental health field. The overwhelming majority of people who seek treatment for a mental disorder do not get better, at least not fully and over the long haul. They just don't. Even with a simple diagnosis like depression, the majority of people who get treatment for depression do not get all the way better, and that whatever improvement they get does not last for years. And if you think I'm being too pessimistic, mental disorders are now the leading cause of disability on the planet. And the number one diagnosis that disables more people is plain old depression. Even though we got tons of antidepressants and psychotherapy and shock treatment and ketamine and psychedelics and all of it, they don't work for the majority of people who seek treatment. So we need new ways to think about and understand mental illness. And at the end of the day, I think the biggest conundrum is that, we know all of these risk factors for mental illness, neurotransmitters, hormones, genetics, it runs in families. People are born this way. That must be it. But trauma and social factors, trauma, abuse, neglect, loneliness, all of these things come together to cause mental illness. But if you ask any researcher or clinician, well, exactly how do those come together and how exactly do they cause mental illness in the brain? The answer is no one knows. It's too complicated. The brain is so complicated. Nobody can figure it out. It's all a big unknown. And that's really where I was as an academic psychiatrist up until 2016, when I, like, everything that I knew was upended. And it was with this patient, um, a 33-year-old man with schizoaffective disorder, which is a cross between schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. And this man had hallucinations and delusions every day of his life. He was chronically paranoid. He could barely leave the house. He had tried 17 different medications, but they didn't work for him. They did cause him to gain a tremendous amount of weight. So, weighing 340 pounds, he asked for my help to lose weight. And we decided to try the ketogenic diet. Within 2 weeks, not only is he losing weight, but I start to notice this really profound antidepressant effect in him. And within 2 months, he spontaneously tells me, you know, those voices that I'm hearing all the time, they're going away. And you know how I always thought that there were all these people out to get me? I don't think that's true anymore. And it probably never was. He started to realize that he really did have schizophrenia and that it was probably going away. That man went on to lose now 160 pounds, and he's kept it off to this day. But he was able to do things that he had not been able to do since his diagnosis. He was able to go out in public and not be terrified. He was able to complete a certificate program, able to perform improv in front of a live audience, able to move out of his father's home, at least for a period of time. And that completely dumbfounded and shocked me. And I went on a journey to understand what in the hell just happened.
Wow. Well, there's so much there. Number one, I think your honesty is important around how severe this is. I'm a big fan of turning and facing both individually as well as societal issues, because if we don't face it, then we're just like la 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 la, you know, we have our hands over our eyes or fingers in our ears, and nothing gets better. Certainly nothing gets better if nothing changes, right? And I also like that you acknowledge being as high academically as you are and the position that you're in, to also admit it's infinitely complex and we can't possibly understand all of it, is also a very, very important piece to it all. I think the humility, and certainly probably that story helped support that in terms of like, holy shit, what just occurred in front of me. So I just want to applaud you for those two things, because that's necessary and needed in this world more and more and more, especially as researchers and doctors and clinicians, and you know, the questioning, the discourse of I don't know, but I'm willing to look and look and look and explore and ask questions and dialogue. I mean, it's beautiful to hear. Just as a side note, I had I'm not a clinician. I have a master's in psychology, but a friend of mine asked me at one point 20 years ago to help his schizophrenic nephew, who was at the time 63 years old, living in a room by himself, drinking, eating, smoking, not functioning in society. And just by being with him and setting up some parameters over the course of a couple years and listening to him and understanding he had schizophrenia pretty bad and all of this stuff, and boundaries are on that. He also, we got his diet in order and everything else, and he lost 70 pounds, got married, got his license again. Yeah, Scotty Brown. He, just because everyone thought he was crazy and there's nothing we can do. And I literally just sat with him 3 days a week and listened and also created some structure. So it's like, the empathetic listening was probably maybe the biggest clinical indicator that I brought into the mix. But so this is very, to me, it's also very close to me because I watched someone, so I really have empathy for you having that experience, because seeing someone transform their life when it was literally just devastating, I just applaud that. I applaud that. So man, I'm just touched. I'm touched by that. So from there, after that happened, and this transformation, because yes, I have on the side, I've been plant-based forever. I'm not afraid of carbs. I don't do ketogenic. I know that there's absolutely clinical data to support there's places and spaces to do that. So I'm not in a camp of everything is this and everything is that and all of that shit. But so I do have some questions on that. But for you, after this next phase here and seeing this happen, then what were some of the steps that you started taking?
So the first thing that I was questioning was really just how the hell did it work? And I knew that I knew that I knew that I couldn't ignore it. And fortunately, this guy's father was involved, and another psychologist was involved in his care. I actually had to go to both of them a couple of times and say, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Because I'm having trouble believing what I'm seeing." Like, and they're all like, "Yeah, no, what the hell's happening? Like, his schizophrenia is melting away, and this is impossible." And I'm like, "And I haven't changed his meds. Like, this doesn't make sense." So I quickly started searching the literature. And at the time, I knew that keto diet for weight loss and for diabetes control, but I did not know that it was an evidence-based treatment for epilepsy. Mm-hmm. Turns out the ketogenic diet was developed 100 years ago now for the treatment of epilepsy. And we've got actually a fair amount of research literature on it. And the reason that was particularly important to me is because we use epilepsy treatments in psychiatry all the time. So we use medications. Some of your listeners might be familiar with Depakote, Tegretol, Lamictal, Topamax, Neurontin or gabapentin, Valium, Klonopin, Xanax. All of those are epilepsy treatments. But we use them in tens of millions of people for psychiatric disorders. And so I quickly recognized, well, wait, if this diet is an epilepsy treatment, maybe that is what it's doing. Maybe it has nothing to do with weight loss per se. Maybe it's that, it's whatever it does to stop seizures, maybe that's helping his brain too. And then I went on this deep dive into the neuroscience literature to understand exactly how does the ketogenic diet stop seizures. Like, that's messed up. Like, how does that work? And I found out that the ketogenic diet changes neurotransmitter systems. It changes calcium regulation. It decreases brain inflammation. It changes the gut microbiome. It helps improve insulin signaling. It does all of these things. And that kind of started a whole new phase of my career, because armed with that information, I started using this treatment in dozens of patients. But I also started collaborating with researchers around the world. I started hearing from clinicians and patients from around the world who had stumbled upon this diet more often than not just to lose weight, but they noticed dramatic improvement in their psychiatric symptoms. And so I quickly started, I started doing research on this, publishing articles, speaking around the world on it, and quickly became kind of an expert in the use of the ketogenic diet for psychiatric patients. But I didn't stop there. I was still like, how the hell is, like, because I'm seeing patients with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder get full, complete remission of their illness off psychiatric medications. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, this is impossible. This goes against everything that the mental health field says right now about schizophrenia. Schizophrenia doesn't go away. And it certainly doesn't go away off medications. And it certainly doesn't go away from a diet. And I'm like, what can this tell me as an academic psychiatrist about the cause of mental illness, of these disorders? Like, I quickly recognize this is a really important clue to the complex puzzle of mental illness that nobody's been able to figure out yet. And because, again, schizophrenia, bipolar, those don't go into remission. We have long known that diet and exercise, not necessarily the keto diet, just a healthier diet, whether it's plant-based, whether it's just get rid of the junk food and processed food, whatever, healthier diets and exercise, we've long known those can help depression and anxiety. And most people know somebody who was kind of depressed or kind of anxious or even severely depressed and anxious, but they got cleaned up their diet, they cleaned up, they started exercising and they got dramatically better. That's not hard for most people to believe. But a diet's not supposed to make schizophrenia and bipolar disorder go away. And so when I started, so that led me on this deep dive into the science. And that science led me to develop essentially what I am calling this, the brain energy theory of mental illness, which suggests the nutshell of all of this science, and we can dive in as much or as little as you want, but the nutshell of this is that mental disorders, and actually all of them, are metabolic disorders of the brain.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, so yeah, I mean, on the one hand, cleaning up our ridiculous modern ultra processed food, inflammatory oils, trans fats, all that stuff is clearly sprinting us towards all kinds of problems, right? So I think, just for everyone and the listeners, because on the one hand, in physiology, when I'm when I first heard of ketosis was in my physiology class, and they're like, survival mechanism in the body, this is what happens, and if you're in ketosis, it's probably a really bad idea. You're in survival mode. And that was my first inkling. And I remember one girl I was studying with who was just flipping out and stressed out, and she went to the doctor, and she was like, not only was she in my class learning about it, she was actually in ketosis, not trying to be, right? And so it was some sort of eating disorder. But so I'm coming from that first. So listen, and and then I have good friends who've written books on mastering diabetes and the science around high saturated fat, gumming up the receptors, and also having a challenge in insulin sensitivity. And I think everything exists. I think it all exists in some sort of way. So let's unpack from your perspective what ketosis is, because I know people think they know what it is, but then there's sensitivities around too much protein can kick you out and all of these other things. So you describe what this guy and what ketosis is, and then what that looks like in terms of someone moving forward. If they're listening, even if they're listening, I'll put a caveat, even if they're listening, they know people who are suffering from, this is not a prescription. We're not telling people to go do this on people, but they can take maybe this information and give it to their medical advisors, etc. But let's unpack what ketosis is, and then how someone would live into that kind of ketosis living model of eating.
Yeah. So so maybe the first thing to get out of the way is that there is a very dangerous state called ketoacidosis.
Mm.
And that most commonly occurs, I mean, that might have been a woman that you knew who had the eating disorder. It most commonly occurs in people with diabetes when their diabetes is way out of control. And usually it's in association with very high blood sugars. And the blood sugars are so high because the insulin resistance is so high, or because the person didn't give themselves any insulin. Um, and um, and that means that the body is not able to use glucose as a fuel source, so it starts producing ketones instead. So ketoacidosis is really bad and life-threatening and dangerous. Therapeutic ketosis is really actually modeled after fasting.
Mhm.
So fasting has been used for millennia in just about every culture in one way or another, usually for healing practices, but also for religious practices in many cultures. So people fast. And when you fast, there's a difference between fasting and starvation. So fasting is going for a defined time without food, but you're not necessarily eating away at all your healthy tissue yet. You're going without food for a day or two or something like that, or even just you're skipping a meal or two, and that can be intermittent fasting. But fasting, if it occurs for more than, probably 24, 48 hours, most people will start to develop ketone bodies. So you burn through a certain amount of glycogen in your body, and then your body starts burning fat. And these ketone bodies are needed to get up to the brain because fatty acids can't get to your brain and fuel your brain cells. So instead, your liver makes ketones. Your liver takes fat, turns some of it into ketones, and those ketones can go up to your brain and fuel your brain. And then we've always got a baseline amount of glucose through gluconeogenesis. Even if you're not eating anything, you'll still have some glucose because your body will make glucose. So the ketogenic diet was actually developed by a physician to mimic the fasting state. That was the whole point of the ketogenic diet, is that he had noticed that fasting itself stops seizures, but when the kids or when the person with epilepsy starts eating again, the seizures come right back, usually with a vengeance. And so he wanted to see, could we trick the body into thinking that it's fasting when it's really not, so that they don't starve to death, but they get the benefits, the anti-epileptic effects of fasting. And so what does the diet look like? There are so many versions of a ketogenic diet. So a lot of times people think of ketogenic diet as one thing. And more often than not, it gets into the diet wars of it's animal source food. It's bacon and eggs. That's all anybody's eating. They're just eating bacon, steak, and eggs. And that's all they're eating. And it's really unhealthy. And it's socially irresponsible. And we don't like it. And everybody's going to have a heart attack.
Right. It like flies in the face of all this other research. And then, but I'm in ketosis, right?
Yes. So that is not necessarily what the ketogenic diet is. For some people, that's what they do, and that will produce a state of ketosis. So for some people, that can be the ketogenic diet. Some people will do an all-meat version of the ketogenic diet called the carnivore diet. Most do not. The majority of people eat both animal and plant-sourced foods. But you can actually do a vegetarian or a vegan version of the ketogenic diet. I know a few people who are vegan ketogenic. So, vegan ketogenic could be, various protein sources, but lots of nuts and avocados and olive oil with lower carb vegetables. So you can have huge salads and other things, but you're going to add extra fats to all of these plant sourced foods, and they can be plant sourced fats. So there are lots of versions of a ketogenic diet, but the goal of the ketogenic diet is simple. It's to mimic the fasting state. It's to get your body to start burning fat, and as an alternate fuel source. So again, glucose never goes away completely. So our bodies will always have some glucose because some cells do need glucose. There's no other way around it. Red blood cells in particular, and some brain cells appear to require glucose, and they can't run on ketones or fats. But you're trying to get your body to go to a fat burning mode. So the types of meals that people can eat, again, it's highly variable, and I'm almost reluctant to give a prescription based on what I just said. I mean, you could do a vegetarian version of a ketogenic diet. You could do an animal sourced food version, like carnivore diet. You could do something in between. But the main goal is to reduce high carbohydrate foods. So you're not going to have starches. You're not going to have starchy anything, vegetables usually. So no potatoes. You're not going to eat grains for the most part. So no grains. You can have lots of vegetables. You can have some berries. And you can have a lot of animal sourced foods. Meats, fish, poultry, things like that. And the goal is, again, to create ketosis. And I think it really, what that diet looks like in real life is highly variable, oftentimes mostly dependent on how much fat the person has on their body. Yeah. So if somebody is really obese, it's actually really easy to get them into ketosis. You can probably restrict if they're really obese, you could probably restrict their carbohydrates to less than 100 grams a day, and they may very well be in a state of ketosis on that diet. The usual prescription is less than 20 grams of carbs a day. But again, it's highly variable. And the goal of the ketogenic diet is ketosis.
Yeah. So, I mean, certainly if you're carrying a ton of weight, I can see how this could be very beneficial. And then listen, I know nothing about the mental, like if people are in this severe state, epilepsy, schizophrenia, all of that stuff. I mean, we all agree that getting them off of the high inflammatory foods. So, like if someone, because again, I'm like, it's like, it's this, I'm trying to find like this place where, when is it appropriate? And then is it like, aside from severe weight loss to get weight loss, I can understand that. Lifestyle to continue, again, keeping the severe mental illness aside for a second, is it realistic? Because I've seen so many people say they're in ketosis and they're not even close. They're not testing it. They have no idea. They're eating all kinds of weird shit. And you know what I mean? And honestly, people, they're just saying it and they're hitting a drum. And I'm like going, oh my God, this is a train wreck, right? And when you shift that, and we all agree, every diet that has some sort of common sense agrees, again, to get rid of the fake foods. So you're going to have huge amounts of change, right? So you're going to get this change. So, listening to this, where is it realistic for common people to keep this going? And do you recommend it for common people in a lifestyle perspective, and or I'm throwing a lot at you, but And or when you get insulin sensitivity under control, right? Then can you then start incorporating a brand new way of eating that is holistic and more holism, and increase, the whole fruits and whole carbohydrates, and have kind of a more of a common sense. I'm curious more than anything about what your point of view is on that.
Yeah. I so if it's okay, I just want to take a couple of seconds to take a big broad picture.
Yeah.
So what I'm arguing is that mental disorders are metabolic disorders of the brain. And there's actually a lot more to metabolism and brain metabolism than just diet. But
Yes.
there's no question diet is a major factor and is a powerful lever. But to give you some examples of other things that could interfere with brain metabolism, they're actually the common sense things that everybody already knows. So if you're overusing alcohol or marijuana, those two, or smoking a lot of cigarettes, those are really bad for your metabolism. And
Right.
those need to go. If you're not sleeping, that needs to get better because sleep affects your metabolism and your mental health. If you've got hormonal or vitamin deficiencies, those can play a role. So there are lots of things that can affect brain metabolism. Exercise is a huge one. Obviously, not exercising is not good for your metabolism, and a really good vigorous exercise program can really benefit your metabolism. But in terms of a dietary intervention, so the broad picture that I would paint is I'm going to put people into one of two categories. If you have a serious mental disorder, especially if you're on prescription medications for it, I want you to work with a mental health professional or a medical professional or someone. Why? Because you've got a serious mental disorder. That's serious. It requires serious help, serious intervention. You deserve competent care. What makes something serious? Any symptoms that are life-threatening or dangerous. Suicidality, homicidality or agitation or aggression, hallucinations, delusions. Those are serious symptoms that threaten your safety or the safety of others. So please work with a professional. You can still do all these treatments, these metabolic treatments, but I just want you to get safe, competent help. And then there's another bucket of people. And this can range from people with moderate mental disorders, even some who are on prescription medications, who want to just improve their mental health. But it can go all the way down to just people who feel I have brain fog. I'm burned out. I'm not happy and peppy like all these other people. Like that Darin guy, he's so happy all the time. I'm not like him. I want to be like him. I want his energy. I want some of that. For you, I'm going to want you to first think about all those other factors I talked about: substance use, sleep, stress, those kind of things. Are you exercising? Get those things in order. If you're using things that are poisoning your metabolism, then get rid of them and stop them, because that could solve your problem right away. Maybe you don't need a change in diet. But I think the first step that I would, is a broad measure for somebody with like burnout, fatigue, mild depression, anxiety. I would actually say, see if you can clean up your diet. Lots of ways to do that, and lots of options and choices. And I'm not here to tell you which option you have to choose. If you want plant-based, omnivore, go for it. But I think exactly what you said. Get rid of the fake stuff. If it's coming in a plastic bag and it has an ingredient list, more than 4 ingredients, and you can't pronounce and kind of define what all of those ingredients actually are, then it's probably not real food. It's got some real food in it, and it's probably got some fake food or chemicals or whatever we want to call that. But start with maybe clean up your diet. Focus on real foods, whole foods. Doesn't mean you have to eat them as the whole thing. You can have applesauce if all it has is apples in it. That's still a whole food. It's just mushed apples. But um, Focus on real whole foods. And for some people, that can be enough. Some people don't even have to do that. They just have to get rid of the ultra extreme junk. And I described like one kid who got so much better, where the only intervention was get rid of the sugar during the week. He was eating tons of sugar. He was clearly developing insulin resistance, and he was not ready for any major diet change. He was still eating his goldfish and all sorts of other things that I think you and I probably would say, well, that's not necessarily the healthiest food to be eating. He was still eating it, but what he was willing to do was get rid of the sugar during the week. And that was enough of an intervention. He paired it with a light therapy in the morning, but those two things together were more than enough, like 4 years strong now. So for some people, clean up the diet. And for others, it might be something else. It may be carbohydrate restriction. Slowly but surely, see if you can reduce your carbs. Because if you are insulin resistant, lowering your carbohydrates can be helpful to help you regain your insulin sensitivity. And as you said, once people do that, sometimes usually, more often than not, they can start to reintroduce carbohydrates into their diet, and they're perfectly fine, and they can manage them. Once they are fully sensitized again and more metabolically healthy, they can handle more carbs. But so I think there are lots of variables. If people want to try a ketogenic diet to treat mild depression, anxiety, or moderate depression or OCD or something, I'm in full support of it. And I've talked with actually dozens and dozens of people who have dramatically improved sometimes chronic disorders, like a few people that I know, chronic OCD. They were trying medication after medication. It was not getting better. And they did a ketogenic diet kind of on their own. They winged it. They did ketogenic diets on their own, and their OCD pretty much went into remission. And they ended up being able to get off meds. Because again, the ketogenic diet, a lot of people in this field, there are these diet wars, and there are people who hate the ketogenic diet and say it's not a healthy diet. I am a brain physician, so to speak. I'm a psychiatrist, but I focus on brain disorders. And I actually don't see the ketogenic diet as a diet. I see it as a brain therapy because it's changing neurotransmitters. It's decreasing brain inflammation. It's doing all sorts of things to brain cells. Ketones have a special place in forcing your body to produce ketones creates metabolic changes in the body and brain that can be beneficial for some people at least.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I and I have read quite a bit of research on the ketosis, just because it keeps popping up, and because people on their own are just flinging themselves in it, and for the most part, they're not hurting themselves because they've eliminated, like you said, a lot of the junk, and have created some more structure around it. I am curious. I would love for you to talk with Robbie Barbaro and Dr. Kambata, because they are doing the mastering. They're both type 1 diabetic, right? So they became type 1 diabetic in college, switched everything and started studying this stuff. And so they are on the other side. They're not anti ketosis. They're also seeing the research around saturated fat affecting, of course there's other factors, but affecting the sensitivity. So they have people eliminating all saturated fat, all of it, and then whole, again, no ultra processed or processed food, whole foods. And they're reversing, I don't know about mental disorders, but they're changing people's lives in the thousands as well. So it's like I'm just like, I offer it just as someone who's curious. I don't know what the brain metabolism is doing in that case, right? It's obviously it's not ketosis, it's not ketones, but it's also eliminating a lot of inflammatory responses and a lot of other things. But so I would love to see that dialogue, because they're not confrontational either. They're just like, hey, this is what we say. We're helping with thousands of people. We see saturated fat. So it's just as a caveat
Yeah.
there. It's really interesting. But I like that, I like what you said, because your focus is healthy brains, and your focus is bringing this, you know, it's that Mayo Clinic study that people may not have heard. I don't know why it's not up front and center. 2.7% of all Americans are deemed healthy, right? And I'm like, wow, like the fact that we're running around with uh, uh, you know, immune metabolism, disease fragility in such a degree, it's like it's already beyond a fire. It's like blazing, and enter in any sort of stress, any sort of pandemic, and like whoever's not in that 2.7%, they're susceptible to all of that stuff. So that's where I kind of go. It's like, man, like what are we doing? And I think that um I think, like, I would love to get your take on, we have the rise of mental disorders in children and kids nowadays. Like, I mean, this is a kind of a opening up the aperture a little bit. I would love to get your take on what you think about that stuff, and maybe how we can, and parents may be listening, like, what can we do to kind of nurture, and then you add on stress and all of that stuff, and sugary drinks and caffeinated, and who knows what they're freaking vaping. And then I'd love to also I got so many questions. I'd love to also then talk to you about, the growing chemical warfare of our endocrine disruptors and phthalates and all of that stuff that's playing a major role.
Yeah. So the the big picture is, as you said, at the and I just want to start to connect the dots for people. Even at the exact same time that rates of obesity and diabetes are skyrocketing in the population around the world, the rates of mental disorders are also skyrocketing in the population across, and it's across the board.
Goes hand in hand, right?
It's not just depression and anxiety. Everybody thinks it's burnout. No, no, folks. It's not just the mild or, those disorders. It's across the board. Rates of bipolar disorder are skyrocketing, especially in youth. Rates of autism have tripled in the last 20 years. And at first glance, most people are like, well, those have nothing to do with obesity and diabetes. Are you saying, Dr. Palmer, are you saying that obesity causes all mental illness? No, that is not at all what I'm saying. And let me be abundantly clear about it. Obesity, as far as I'm concerned, is a symptom. It is a symptom of metabolic dysfunction in a person's body or brain. Mental illness is a symptom. It is a symptom of the exact same thing: metabolic dysfunction in the body and brain. So to drill this home for people with two kind of very concrete studies that will drill this home, that are largely unexpected. Like, most people are like, well, yeah, if everybody's eating junk food, it's not surprising that they're more depressed and anxious. Yeah, and that's true. Yes, those things are true. But here are two kind of probably shocking studies. So, I mentioned autism rates have tripled in 20 years. Clearly, it's not the kids diet because the kids aren't even born yet, or they're really young, and like that they were born that way. That's got nothing to do with diet. Well, listen to this. If you are a woman who is obese and diabetic, 3 to 4 times increased risk for having an autistic child. If you are an obese man, your sperm is doubling the risk of having an autistic child.
Holy shit.
So everybody's scratching their head. Where the hell's this autism coming from? What's going on here? We can't figure this out. This is just so confusing. Well, open your eyes to the science. Open your eyes to research that is already published time and again, numerous studies. In case you didn't know, pregnant women have increasing, skyrocketing rates of obesity and diabetes. Men also are included in these skyrocketing rates of obesity. That's where autism is almost certainly coming from. Is it the children's fault? No, it's the parents. And is it the parents' fault? No, the parents are suffering from a metabolic disorder. That is really the way I see it. I am not at all about fat shaming, wagging my finger, telling people you're just a lazy slob, and the reason you have an autistic child is all your fault. That is not my message. My message is exactly what you said. We have a crisis in the world today. People are being poisoned metabolically with something. Is it our food supply? A lot of people, debate about that, and and then we can even start to get into the diet wars. But I think, as you said, most of the diet warriors agree, get rid of the crap and the chemicals. Let's at least start there. But is it more? Could it be more than that? Could it be all of the environmental toxins and microplastics and all that stuff, the pesticides and herbicides that we're all getting in our water? And could those? They are, as you said, endocrine disruptors. What does the endocrine system do? Well, the endocrine system actually affects our metabolism. It affects how much we weigh, but it also affects our brain function, folks. And so, yeah, if you're swallowing lots of endocrine disruptors every day in your water, that is disrupting your endocrine system, which is disrupting your metabolism, which might make you gain a lot of weight. Even if you're eating the exact same amount of food, even if you're eating a healthy diet, you could be gaining weight because your metabolism is being poisoned. But it's also, guess what? All that stuff affects your brain too. That affects your brain function. And when your brain function is off, guess what? That means you might get diagnosed with a mental disorder because your brain's not working right and you're having symptoms that shouldn't be there. Depression, anxiety, psychosis, whatever. I'll give you another study to just link this, to make this clear to folks. One study followed 5,000 kids from the ages of 1 to 24. They found that the kids beginning at age 9, the kids who had the highest levels of insulin resistance, were 5 times more likely to have a psychosis at-risk mental state by the time they turned 24. So that's 500% more likely to be at risk for psychosis. And they were 300% more likely to already be diagnosed with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. So insulin resistance, beginning at age 9, triples the probability that you are going to develop schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. That is the kind of concrete, clear data that we've already got to help us begin to understand the connections between what we call metabolic health and mental health. But what I've done with the brain energy theory is I take it down to the cellular level, for better or worse. People who hate science or not, you may want to pass on my book, I guess. But if you really want to understand mental health, you got to read the book. But I take it down to the cellular level because, again, people are all scratching their head trying to figure this stuff out and they can't make sense of it. And I actually think it is so much simpler than most scientists realize. And the good news is that once you understand this science, it leads to more effective ways to help people. And it leads to common sense interventions like considering a dietary intervention or a change in diet, but also exercise and sleep and stress reduction and get rid of the toxins and the alcohol, the marijuana, all that. But also, the example you shared, psychological and social factors play a huge role in metabolic and mental health. And that means connection with other humans. That means feeling heard, feeling respected, feeling valued, having a purpose in your life. Those things affect not just mental health, but they actually affect, and we've got lots of studies, those things affect your metabolic health. People who are lonely are more likely to die early deaths from heart attacks. They're also more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. The connections are there. Metabolic health and mental health are inseparable in my mind. And again, once we understand these connections, the solutions become obvious. Like you're gonna be like, this is what I've been saying. This is what my podcast is all about. This is what I do. And I'm gonna be like, yeah, this is what you do, and we need more of it, and we need to start doing this.
That is what you just said there is I hope people hit pause and just kind of soak that in for a second. I hope they just take that in, because that is so alarming. The fact that as unhealthy parents, it's having a effect on the children and the offspring. And, again, it's like, there's 200 chemicals in the umbilical cord of each mother giving birth today. And most of them are carcinogenic. It's like, I didn't make it up. It's just there. But I love, again, we're going full circle back to, you're saying, I'm going down to the cellular level. It's like, unless we look and see and unpack this to make the connections that I'm so proud of you for doing, to make the connections of these things between mental health and metabolic problems, obviously Alzheimer's, dementia, all of these things are also interlinked, etc., Parkinson's, you name it, MS, all these things. Unless we make these connections, we're just sprinting down some pharmacological intervention and just not, it's showing up with the squirt gun to a forest fire. It's like, it's never, ever going to get there. And to your point, I think what you said in the beginning is like, that's what you said in the beginning. Like, nobody's changing because they're looking and doing the wrong things, when the most common sense things that we can do, we're not doing, right? And where is it coming from? Well, you just heard it. That's where it's coming from. And my God, yeah, it's funny because I have spent a year working on a book. My father, speaking of mental illness, my father had chemical sensitivity in the 90s. So in order to be around my dad, he would get fogged out. And this was a double master's, tenured professor, super smart, amazing guy, loved to connect with students and da 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 da. And all of a sudden, he can't even be around fragrances and deodorants, and he fogged out. And he's like, so he had to forced retirement. In order to be around him, he educated me on, hey, these things are harmful. So you got to wash your clothes and these laundry detergents, these deodorants, these shampoos in order just to be around my father. Right. So and his thyroid was gone. It's a whole story in the Navy and working on atomic bombs and blah, blah, blah. But he was there. And that was my first. I have now worked on a book called Fatal Conveniences for the last year, unpacking, Doc, these chemicals that we're swimming in, right? And it's like, you're making these links. I'm trying to make these links of these invisible things that are beating the shit out of us. And then we're like wondering, kind of like as a society, we're throwing up our hands going, oh, that sucks. It's like, no, there's reasons for all of it. And you're doing the work to make the connection. And again, going back to the miraculousness of that schizophrenic patient that blossomed right in front of you, for you to not just throw it in the category of like, well, that's a miracle, because many of your colleagues probably would just do that. They just blow it off as like, ugh. But you actually said, no, there's something here. And I think it's safe to say that I'm really, really happy to meet you, and I'm really happy that you're making these connections, and let's keep making them, because it flies in the face of just the apathetic world that just is kind of moving along. And I don't know about you, but that just doesn't work for me. Like,
it doesn't work for me either. And I actually, I actually think that most people, at least most people that I meet, whether they're patients or just friends or family or just acquaintances, most people desperately want to be better.
Yeah.
But they're being given the wrong information.
Yeah.
They're being told by people, oh, those endocrine disruptors, they don't matter.
Right.
Like, who the hell would say that? Who the hell would say disrupting your hormones with chemicals doesn't matter? But the United States government, the EPA, has on their website, we fully recognize and acknowledge there are endocrine disruptors. But, we're not convinced that means anything. Like, how moronic is that? Like, really?
Right.
Looking at our food supply, same deal. Yeah, there are lots of chemicals, and yeah, people seem to be getting fat from these chemicals, but everybody deserves their treats. Come on, people, come on. So I'm hopeful that if we can get accurate and effective and implementable recommendations to people, that more often than not, people do want to make the changes, and they're willing to make the changes. And I'm going to just hold on to that hope, because otherwise the human species is going to disappear. and probably not in my lifetime, but it's going to disappear. And that is just too heartbreaking and tragic to contemplate.
Yeah, well, it's hard not to see the bricks falling already, right? And so there's two people right here, and maybe many other people listening are going, you know what? That's true. So let's fight for a better life. Let's not just take everything that's told to us. Let's look into it. Let's question. Let's look under the carpet and take responsibility. Because that's, I think it's very easy for all of us to give our power away and think everything on the shelves and everything that's being told to you is true, when in fact most of those things on the middle of the aisles of grocery stores, unfortunately, with the EPA, with the FDA, with the USDA, are just allowing certain ingredients to be in there even after they write their own blogs about how bad they are.
Yeah.
If I had a nickel for every time I saw that, I'm going, wait a minute, you're writing about it, you're not regulating it. Huh. That's very interesting to me. So, well, Doc, uh, this has been so amazing. Please stay connected. Where can people find you? And they certainly need to get your book. So, brain energy. Where can people find you? Where can they reach out? Where can they follow you?
So I'll give you two websites, and they're gonna have different purposes soon. So brainenergy.com is probably the most important one. So you can learn more about the book there if you want, but much more importantly, I want to start a grassroots movement. We need major changes in the mental health field. What we are doing is not working.
Yeah.
Tens of millions of people are suffering and want better answers. And I believe they will do what they need to do if we give them accurate information, but we need a movement. The other place people can find me is chrispalmermd.com. And you can learn more about just me, my work, my research, other things. But brainenergy.com is really going to focus on, hopefully soon, a grassroots movement for mental health.
Well, I'm in, Doc. I'm in. So you got
Thank you.
my support, and I know everyone listening was enlightened here today with many bits of information and hopefully hope as well, because facing and looking and learning and being curious is the hope for the future for us to change this stuff. So thank you for the work you do. Thank you for the work that you will continue to do. And let's let it rip, man.
Yeah, no, thank you.